Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Atlanta Press Club. My name is Christy Wooten. I'm the president of the Atlanta Press Club. I want to thank you for joining us today for our online newsmaker event, Lecrae, I Am Restored. We're excited to have Lecrae here with us for the whole hour today. We'd like to remind you that if you have any questions for our speaker or moderator today, please type them into the chat function at the bottom of your Zoom window. Thank you, as always, for supporting the work of the nonprofit Atlanta Press Club. By joining this webinar with us today, please visit atlantapressclub.org for our other upcoming events, including a link to register, or view the upcoming Loudermilk Young debates. The October 19th debate is the Senator Loeffler debate, so I know you don't want to miss that one. On our site, you may also sponsor an event, join as a member, or donate to the club. So let's get started. The events of 2020 have changed so much about the way we view art and music and the makers who create it. If there was ever a year in recent memory where both performers and listeners were rocked to their spiritual core, filled with questions and seeking guidance from some sort of higher power, 2020 is definitely that year. Today's guest, Lecrae, is one of the most fascinating artists who is writing, recording, and pursuing other interests amid a media and entertainment landscape that can be rewarding, but also treacherous. He is a Christian whose latest book, I Am Restored, you see it on your screen there, it talks about how he recalibrated his life to make room for a new version of what faith can mean. We do want to let you know today to be sure and go ahead and get your questions for Lecrae queued up in the Q&A. So enter those into the chat function or the Q&A now. Here's a quick overview of the topics we'll be talking about with Lecrae today during this webinar. For those of you who are not familiar with him, we'll give you an overview of Lecrae's background and music career. We'll talk about Lecrae's songs and his faith journey. We'll talk about his writing of the book, I Am Restored. We will definitely be talking about some of the events of 2020. Also, Lecrae's community work and philanthropy. We'll have plenty of time for audience questions. And also, we want to let you know that you can order Lecrae's book at lecrae.com or Acapella Books here in Atlanta. See those links, and we will put those in the chat panel sometime during the hour for you today. All right. Today we've asked freelance music and culture journalist Christina Lee to moderate the conversation. Christina's work has appeared in Billboard, in The Guardian, in Pitchfork, and other publications. She and Regina Bradley co-host Bottom of the Map, a podcast about hip hop in the contemporary American South, which was featured in Atlanta Magazine, Spotify, and the New York Times. She also wrote and narrated Racket, Inside the Gold Club, an 8-episode podcast series by School of Humans and iHeartRadio about the months-long federal trial surrounding the Atlanta Strip Club, a project that Vulture named among the best new true crime podcasts in September 2020. We're going to welcome Christina in a moment, but first we're going to play a trailer of sorts about Lecrae's life. And then we'll get started with the introduction of Lecrae and the conversation.
My name is Lecrae Moore, and 14 years old. I'm in the 8th grade. This is a video about my dreams. I want to be a rapper. Another one of my dreams is to be big and strong. I also dream of being, family man, father, married. But what I really want to be is a businessman, someone with class, culture, and status, And the winner is Gravity by Lecrae. We're thankful for Jesus for giving us the opportunity to use our gifts. Obviously, you can't celebrate gifts without celebrating the giver of all gifts, so I want to celebrate Jesus. And then it all came home. I literally woke up one day in like a clinical depression.
Okay, so that's a provocative opening there for our event today. I'll let Christina take it away, and we'll talk a little bit about Lecrae, and then the discussion will begin.
Thank you so much, Christy, and thank you so much to the Atlanta Press Club for having this conversation. I'll be honest, I didn't think that this was going to be happening in this type of venue, so I am honored. And without further ado, let's go ahead and introduce our featured guest. As if you didn't know him already, Lecrae is a multi-Grammy award-winning, platinum-selling artist who has evolved into a New York Times bestselling author, entrepreneur, speaker, thought leader, philanthropist, as well as co-owner and president of Reach Records right here in Atlanta. He is part of a new wave of thought leaders who are engaging the culture and taking Jesus out the pulpits into the wider world in hopes of restoring faith. Please welcome all the clap emojis, please, for Lecrae.
Appreciate it.
Trying to do our best in this virtual setup. Let's start at the very beginning. We got to meet 14-year-old Lecrae in that little snippet. Where is that footage from, and how did you rediscover it?
I was going to a normal public middle school, and I had a teacher who recommended me to go to a school of performing arts, and you had to audition. And I was like, I don't know what to say. How do I audition for this? And so I borrowed a friend's camcorder and just made like an audition tape talking about myself in order to get into this performing arts school. And my mom just so happened to have the footage of that. And we found it, dug it up, and that's what you got.
Was it on it was on VHS, I'm assuming.
Yeah, it was on VHS, of course.
That's amazing. It's amazing. Explain the pivotal role that hip hop was playing in your life back then for those.
Oh my gosh, it was everything. You know, you got to remember, hip hop to me was like a cultural like landscape. It was what I saw every day. It was the language that helped me express where I was coming from. There were no voices that articulated the things that I was experiencing outside of hip hop. So I don't know where else I would have found any voices to relate to that were talking about the issues that I saw on a regular basis.
What's an example of the sorts of experiences you weren't hearing about anywhere else?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know where I would hear about, you know, the fatherlessness and the experience of that I was seeing happening. I don't know if I would have heard about neighborhoods that look like mine, or gang members, or, you know, people being incarcerated in your family. You know, I'm having to visit family members in prison. And so, you know, the war on drugs and how that decimated our community, there was no outlets for me to even hear voices talking about what I was experiencing.
Got you. So on that note, like, why do you think hip hop has continued to be your primary medium for just expressing who you are and where you are in your journey?
Well, I mean, you know, hip hop is a culture. I mean, it's transformed over the years, but it's a culture. So it's kind of like if you grew up in Brazil, there's some cultural elements that are just going to be a part of you because you grew up in it. And so hip hop is a cultural phenomenon that I just grew up in. And so, you know, most of my experience in life, my milestones probably have something to do with hip hop. You know, the clothing that I wore, or the soundtrack to my first day of school. So it's almost like a language. It's like my primary language or secondary language next to English, which is why it's still the music is the mode of communication for me.
Got you. Now, through your music in particular, what's been so compelling is that music has been how you've expressed your evolving relationship with your faith, and you garnered a lot of attention specifically because it was hip hop. You know, by your first Grammy win, which I'm sure it's like right behind us, it's for 2012 Gravity, right? For Best Gospel Album. And that was like the first time a hip hop artist had won that distinction. So that's huge. So at this time, what was your relationship with your faith, and how did this play out in the music, in projects like Gravity?
Yeah, I mean, you know, faith, you got to remember, I didn't grow up in like this very churched background, very free spirited. I lived in Texas, I lived in California, I lived in Denver. So just not like, outside of Texas, it wasn't really like a very religious culture. So I grew up just being able to explore beliefs and views, and my faith. I had a spiritual transformation in 19 where you got to just think about somebody whose whole perspective of the world has now been shifted. And so I just needed to communicate through that lens now. It was like, whoa, I never knew any of these things. I need to express this stuff that I just felt like I never knew about. So the music was a way for me to express it.
Got you, got you. And at the same time, you were pretty much forging a path outside of like this established system. I just wanted you to talk a little bit more about that, just
Yeah.
about that journey.
Yeah. I mean, much like how hip hop originally started out as this kind of like off the beaten path, kind of cultural musical moment that mainstream music didn't really know what to do with. What I was doing was very similar. So now hip hop has become more mainstream. And then of course there's gospel and there's contemporary Christian music, but those two worlds don't talk to each other. And so here I'm standing in between both of these worlds, speaking both languages at the same time. And neither world kind of felt like, it's kind of like almost like having a kid who's from two different worlds, a biracial child who can speak both languages, but no one culture really claimed him fully. So I had to just create a new lane for these, biracial musical children and just run in that lane. And that's, where I found, through trial and tribulation, found myself most comfortable was in that middle space.
That middle space. And it's in that middle space that you start to get projects like Church Clothes 2. That's really how I came to know you. And in your first book, actually, not to be confused with your new one, but this is Unashamed, you talk about how that particular project was a turning point because it was hosted by Don Cannon, who is an influential producer right here in Atlanta. How did that collaboration expand your reach as an artist?
Oh, it was night and day. I mean, for me, for somebody who came from the culture of hip hop, and if I go to South by Southwest, I'm hanging out with all of the artists out there, the mainstream artists. I didn't really know any prominent Christian artists. I didn't have access to them, but these were people that I kind of shook hands with, and just them wanting to collaborate and me processing what that could look like. I thought, let's do it. Even though I knew this kind of Christian fan base would not understand it and probably frown upon this, like fraternizing. I think it opened people's eyes to these worlds being able to connect authentically. And man, the floodgates opened up.
So quote unquote secular artists, had they always been open to this sort of collaboration, even if they're looking at the label and seeing like, oh, he's gospel?
Yeah, I think they just, for them, it was more about respecting the craft. So it was the craftsmanship, like, because they hadn't been exposed to anybody. Unfortunately, a lot of times Christian artists, Christian filmmakers, Christian creatives will sacrifice the integrity of the art to make sure this message gets across instead of just doing good art. And so what they appreciated was that I was not trying to just slather the music with this message. I was really intentional about making good art. And when they saw the good art, they could respect that. And they wanted to be a part and collaborate because they just appreciated the artistic capabilities.
Okay, okay. I mean, obviously, if something is new, there has to be a level of understanding kind of built into there, right?
Right.
Got you, got you. Now, okay, in your new book, I Am Restored, you did mention a collaboration with the artist Big Crit. And you talked about how that was met with controversy. I guess just break down that controversy first. What happened?
You got to remember or understand, I was living in like these different contexts artistically. So Crit, I feel like him and I are kindred spirits in that we're both kind of these thought-provoking artists. We're very conscious, in our art form. Both of us are from the South, and just kind of have a more kind of earth tone, not as polished and flashy type of kind of artistic expression. And so there's that context. There's also the context I lived in, which was like this Christian rapper like this culture within a culture context as well, where that middle ground, that middle way, who could appreciate Big Crit, but at the same time was kind of dogmatic and wanted to be distinct from the mainstream. And then you have just contemporary Christian evangelical culture who didn't understand what a Big Crit was, why Big Crit was important, and all they wanted was the message, the message, the message. And that space was predominantly kind of white youth group kids. And so me doing a song with Big Crit did not register to that kind of third tier of like evangelical youth group kids. It was like, what are you doing and what is happening and why are you collaborating with this guy and isn't he a sinner and what's happening? And so it was like heads were exploding, but Crit and I were concerned with creating good art that was a genuine expression of what we saw faith and life to look like.
And I'm glad you kind of speak to that, because when I saw you live, I think it was around the time of Anomaly, I was just struck by the sheer diversity in the crowd. Depending on who you were, it could have either been a friend outing or it could have been a father and son outing. You know what I mean? And I don't think I've seen a hip hop artist necessarily perform to as crowd as diverse as that necessarily. So I'm just wondering, you know, as your career continues to evolve, like how did those crowds change, and what was it like to continue answering to all those different people that who may have been seeing you every given night?
Yeah, that's part of, you know, as you get into the book, like that's part of the mental breakdown and the mental struggle is trying to wear all those hats at all times. In a lot of ways, I liken myself to a professional athlete, because a professional athlete has this diverse audience. You know, there's young, there's old, and they have to mince their words. They have to constantly think about what to say. You know, when they're out on that court, it's pretty raw. Some of the language is not G-rated, and so that's just not the expectation that people have in Middle America of these pro athletes. But when they get on in front of the camera, when they're selling cereal boxes, there's a whole different demeanor that they kind of have to have. And so for me, it was difficult because I had this fan base of like people who loved hip hop and authenticity and the rawness of it, and met me through Big Crit or met me through Don Cannon, and you know, they wanted it raw and real. And then I had kind of that middle ground way who wanted me to be very distinct. And yes, I'm hip hop, but, you know, and then there was this whole other crowd who just wanted clean, wholesome material to make sure the kids were entertained with. And that it was mind racking to like cater to all those different perspectives all the time.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Got you. So, okay, this book, it brings us to a time where you considered leaving everything behind. For those who haven't read it yet, tell us about that period and why you were making those sorts of considerations.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, by and large, there was a contingency of evangelicals who were, you know, seeing me as a poster child. In a lot of ways, I was a giant virtue signal for what we could look like in the future. I think it was like, hey, this is a token candidate. I liken it to like I was the Tim Tebow of rap for a lot of people, you know, and so they're like, this is our guy. As far as the evangelical movement was concerned, this is our guy. He represents all our values and our beliefs. And look, he's in the hip hop world over there. We can't go over there, but he can, and he's doing what we would do if we were over there. And so I don't think I saw that as problematic initially, but then I was in a lot of ways objectified. As long as I do what they want me to do, then I'm beloved. But they don't want all of me. They just want the part of me that wants to carry their messages and their perspectives to the rest of the world. So when I wasn't fulfilling their desires, there was a lot of backlash, and they didn't want every aspect of who I was. And so when I'm bringing up other issues that are important to me, such as social injustice, racial injustice, things that, were important to who I am, and obviously important to the culture of hip hop and hip hop culture, which is primarily minority based. There was a lot of tension there. And so for me, when I wasn't supported by this evangelical fan base, I didn't have any categories. To me, they were God. Not literally, but they're the representation of God to me. And if these people can't see me for who I am and what I'm worth, but they're the ones teaching me about God, then maybe they don't know anything. And it just put me into a weird disillusionment where I became depressed and frustrated and just started trying to figure out what faith was really all about. And got so disillusioned that I said, I just don't want any of it right now. Threw the baby out with the bathwater.
And for how long of a period is this like playing out? Because when we're talking about the death spreading the Black Lives Matter movement, unfortunately, we're talking about years of brutality.
Yeah. I think I started to spiral around late 2014, early 2015. And then it really, like, I think I put my stake in the ground around 2016, where I just kind of, I wouldn't tell you I was an atheist at that point in time, but what I would say is that I'm not sure who or what God is, and nothing makes sense to me right now, because every time I would, this is the wild part about living in the Western world. Every time I would Google something and try to find answers or try to find a perspective, an intelligent outlook, it was always a white man behind the article. And so it was like I could not escape this dominant perspective anywhere I looked, and it was maddening to me.
Got you. And I mean, I have to commend you for the fact that you kind of show this self-awareness, like, because on page 74, you're talking about this Washington Post article where this Duke Divinity School professor called you a mascot for white evangelicalism. And you say that that's like sort of a breaking point in moving away from these sort of evangelical traditions. I mean, I'm just trying to imagine what that was like for you to first like see that, but then sort of like live with that critique.
Yeah, it's rough, man. I mean, it's almost like when you when you find out one day that your family name is, that you've been proud of, that you've been a part of, and you've been glad to be a part of, is also synonymous with political agendas that you don't support, is also synonymous with racial agendas that you don't support, is also synonymous with, silence on social injustices. You begin to backpedal and say, oh my gosh, this is my family name, and you don't want to be associated with this. And so when someone says, no, not only are you associated with this family, you are the mascot for this family. You're the poster child for this family. And that was like, no, what have I done? And so that was tough.
So how has your faith been strengthened or tested in this current political moment compared to when you were even criticized for visiting Barack Obama some years ago?
Oh man. What I've had to learn is that America nor evangelicalism have a monopoly on the faith. I'm not a Muslim, but I have friends who, come from a wide array of different types of Islamic beliefs. And what most people don't understand is that you can't say, oh, he's a Muslim, and so that makes him just like this other woman over here who's a Muslim. And similarly, to say I'm a Christian, and maybe I agree with some views that evangelicals have, but I don't agree with all of those views. And so in this political climate, I think people struggle because in their mind, being an evangelical or being a Christian is synonymous with being a conservative Republican. And so I'm a firm believer that for me, being faithful and consistent with my spiritual beliefs would make me a pretty lousy partisan, just because there's too much nuance in what I believe to see any political party as like the end all be all, the one that's got it all right and got it all together. And so for me, it's definitely more about policies and more about candidates than it is about partisanship.
Got you. Got you. Got you. Well, another aspect of this book touches on your mental health journey and the resources that you found to be available. Like on one hand, I would say, in your opinion, where did it get to the point regarding these issues you felt like you were observing churches telling you to just pray the pain away? Like, when did you first notice that aspect?
Yeah, I think when I remember speaking about Trayvon Martin years ago, I think the most tempered response was something along the lines of we'll just pray for him. We just need more of the gospel. The most disrespectful one was, of course, like, stop your whining. We all have the same opportunities. And that would carry on as I began to express my pain. It would be a cycle. It'd be a cycle of like, express my pain met with, these candid or cliche responses, or even like, people trying to shame me for expressing my pain, which would make me retreat into more shame, which would create anger, which would create me lashing out, which would create more pain. And it was this cycle. And there was nobody answering my questions. There was nobody saying, man, I'm really sorry you're feeling this way, and here's my thoughts on this. It was always like, well, you just need to pray. You just need the gospel and everything will be okay. And it was hard for me because you're talking to somebody who's gone to seminary, who's studied all these scriptures, and I'm still struggling. So this trite remark you're giving me is not helping.
It's essentially being like, deal with it,
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, got you. So on that note, like, just talk about the importance of therapy in recent years, whether that's dealing with past traumas, dealing with this current political moment, or the expectations that come with fame.
Yeah. So I had to recognize and realize that, integration is something that is missing from a lot of contexts, not even specifically the church, but just the human agenda, human context in general. The integration of friendships, relationships, therapy, it's all an integrated process. And so when you go to therapy, what they're going to ask you is, do you have any good friends? Because they know that it's a dance, that the good friends and the therapy work together. And so a lot of times we just don't believe in that whole integrative process. And therapy for me, having good friends is like having a workout partner, somebody who can go to the gym with, and you guys can get at it, but they may not know specifically how many calories you need to burn or your nutrition list. Having a therapist is like having a nutritionist and a trainer. They can zero in and specialize on specific things that you need. And though I believe we're spiritual beings, we're made up of physical parts. And so I think we often think of the brain as this, metaphysical thing and this existential thing. And it's an organ that needs to be taken care of. And there's processes and there's exercises, just like your lungs or your heart. And that's what therapy is about. It's about helping that organ to process things correctly. And so therapy was essential to me moving forward and getting the help I needed.
I love the way that you put that, because as you're sort of like retraining your mind, like the way that I've learned about it in therapy is like you're creating neural pathways. There's one way you've learned to behave, and you're literally having to carve out a different neural pathway so that you change your behavior going forward. So I love
Absolutely.
that. I love
Absolutely.
that. Yeah. So, sir, you're a prolific man, but I have to wonder about the timeline of all this. Like, walk us through the timeline of this book. When did this process begin?
Yeah. I mean, obviously of course I'm starting as I'm writing the book, I'm starting back way historical as far as my childhood. But when I started writing the book was when I found therapy starting to have some serious breakthroughs for me. Some of this was journal entries, kind of in around early 2019. I had some journal entries that I felt like were helping me process what I was experiencing, and they were profound things. Like one of the things that I realized was that I had created all these rules and these expectations of myself, and when I didn't live up to them, I found myself downcast. When the reality is, I created these expectations, and so I'm putting unnecessary burdens on my own shoulders, which is causing depression. And that was a realization that I came to during that time period. And so as I would go to therapy and as I would find healing, I would just begin to express and write in my journal and talk to my buddy Tyler Burns, who's a contributor, and helped me shape a lot of this. And we would just process this over, a period of a year, and just working through everything that you see in that book until literally like sheesh, right before the pandemic. It was kind of like we wrapped up like right before the pandemic hit.
Wow. And so literally by the end of that, you kind of just looked at the pages you had in front of you and was like, that's enough for a book.
Right.
Sure.
Yeah, it's like, all right, I think we got it.
That's convenient. That's convenient. So for those who still need to pick up their copy, I Am Restored is divided into 3 parts. I think the first 2 sort of names what we talked about earlier, which is that like the oversights I think that can sometimes happen in the evangelical community, whether that's in regards to politics or whether that's in regards to mental health. And then the third part offers some broader solutions, and you call for a growth into a mature, whole, communal, global Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we get there? That sounds fantastic. How do we get there?
Yeah, well, I think you've got to be a mature, whole, communal, global person first, right? I think it starts with you. And maturity is, being able to acknowledge truth and information and apply it to where it becomes wisdom. And so I think I liken it, an analogy I'd use is farming. Mature, whole, healthy, communal, global. If I'm a farmer, maturity is me understanding that the sun comes up and comes down at the same time every day. There's 4 seasons depending on where I live. And so I've got to, recognize and realize that some of these rocks need to come out of the garden, and I've got to plant the right things at the right time in order to see them grow, right? That's maturity. Healthy and whole is just stepping back and looking at everything and saying, these leaves are a little brown here. Looking at your own family history, looking at some of the issues that you've gone through. Don't go to therapy when the wheels fall off. Go to therapy before they do, so you can understand what could potentially be happening. It's like driving a car. You don't take your car, if you do take your car in after you run out of oil, you have a problem. You take it in regularly to make sure that everything is as it needs to be. And so part of that is for you to take a look at yourself and step back and say, okay, where am I? And how am I doing? And how am I processing all the information around me? And then as it pertains to being communal and being global, I personally am not a fan of what the Western world has done with the institution of church. It's more of a business than anything. And I'm grateful for the pandemic in a lot of ways, because it's lifted the curtain up on this business that it's been parading itself as, and not as a hospital, a place for healing and health and transformation. And so what we're supposed to be is a place where people can come and feel a sense of family and care and concern, where widows and orphans are loved on and taken care of, where people can feel like they're accepted, not because of how much money they have or their achievements, but because they are made fundamentally and intrinsically valuable and significant. And so that is what community looks like. It recognizes that, you know, we're not just neighbors, we're a body. And when my arm is hurt, I'm hurt. When my leg is hurt, I'm hurt. It's not like, oh man, poor leg, hope the leg figures it out. It's like, no, that's a part of my body and I need to adjust. And when my leg is healed, I celebrate. And so if we can't recognize that one part of our community is hurting, if, oh my goodness, look what's happening in the Black community. I don't see anything, says the arm. You know, I don't see any pain I don't feel it. So it must not be real, legs. You know, but saying, no, let me listen to you because I don't understand. Your experience is different than mine. And let me process and walk with you through what you're experiencing. And then lastly is, when I say global, I just think, man, it's very difficult to live in a Western world and not be arrogant and not be biased and not be privileged. It's just it's difficult. You know, I took my mother to Uganda and I remember her saying, oh, it would be so awesome if we got these roads paved. And I was like, why would that be awesome? Because it would be more like America. It'd be more like the West. Maybe a paved road is not what's best for this community. Maybe we need to learn from roads not being paved. Maybe there's something for us to take from this and learn from this instead of trying to usurp our realities on them. And that's what a global perspective does, is it makes us say, hey, what can we learn from each other? Now, mind you, you get into, when you start talking to evangelicals about anything global, if it's not a kind of a colonial mindset, then the people get paranoid because now you're talking about globalism and socialism, and it's like, the world's gonna catch on fire. But I just think there's an arrogance there, and there's a lack of nuance that doesn't happen.
Got you. So this book follows an album that you released earlier this year called Restoration. And these are really companion pieces in what your press materials call like this Lecrae ecosystem, right? So what's the relationship between the book, the album, and these other pieces?
Yeah, I mean, simplistically, it's just when somebody enters something, you want to make sure that they find the restoration in a particular area that makes sense to them. You know, if you're tactile, if you're an audible learner, if you're a visual learner. So the book is for those people, obviously, who want to experience restoration in a very thick, thorough way. You know, the docuseries is kind of like, you know, a visual overview of everything. It's not as detailed like a movie. The book is always better than the movie, right? You know what I mean? This is reality. And then of course the music, which is the artistic expression of everything that you're reading. And so it's a beautiful thing when you can artistically paint a picture based off of something that you've read, and what does it make you feel, and what is it when you read this book, how do you express yourself? So I just wanted people to have their feel of it and be able to touch it in the ways that make most sense to them. Hopefully they'll touch all aspects of it, but I didn't want to leave any stone unturned.
Got you. So just to clarify, would you say that there's quite a bit of overlap between what's written here and what you wrote in the lyrics for songs like Drown with John Legend?
Yes. If you listen to Drown, you may connect with it emotionally, but you won't necessarily understand what and why Drown was written if you don't read the book.
Got you. Well, speaking of ecosystem, other Atlanta musicians have invested in their local communities, and you have been doing this sort of work for years. Thank you, Subwoofers. Tell us about the work that you've been doing around English Avenue.
Yeah, so that would have been another element of restoration that we would have wanted to bring people in, but COVID hit, which would have been like a physical, like entering into a reality. And restoration for me is more than just a book or an album. It's a lifestyle. And so I've always wanted to be involved in disenfranchised communities because I know that I'm here because somebody else allowed their ceiling to be my floor. You know, I get to walk on the shoulders of a Martin Luther King or a Malcolm X. I get to stand on their shoulders to be who I am today. If Baldwin wouldn't have written the books he wrote, if Outkast wouldn't have broken the barriers in Atlanta hip hop, I wouldn't be able to do what I'm doing. And so for me being in English Ave, I'm offering my insight, my wisdom, my talents, my treasure to create a floor for other generations to walk on. And so these kids in that community, which has historically been disenfranchised, we have a school called Peace Preparatory Academy, which is now going on its 6th year, that was built from scratch. And then now around the school are income affordable housing around the school, or income-based housing around the school, where we're also doing financial literacy training at the school for parents, and then they can move into these housing facilities. But they're phenomenal. They look like downtown lofts because these people deserve to be treated with dignity and deserve to have the same type of quality of life as everybody else does.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And to wrap up at least this section of the conversation, at this point, compared to when you were 14, how do you define failure and success?
I think, failure is when you are not doing what you were created to do. You know what I mean? It's when you're wasting your time trying to be somebody you're not to win the approval of people that you don't need. And so I don't care if you have landed on the moon. If that wasn't what you were meant to do, that's a failure. You know what I mean? Success is not what I do compared to you. Success is what I do compared to what I was created to do. And so I want to be successful by doing what I was built to do. Martin Luther King was not a wealthy man. He did not. I mean, I wish he was. I wish he would have been able to have some of the financial opportunities that, some of us are afforded. But he was successful because he did what he was supposed to do. And so that's why we herald him and we look up to him. It wasn't because he was a financial guru. It wasn't because he was a billionaire. It wasn't because he, wrote hit records. It was because he did exactly what he was put on earth to do. And I think that's what success is.
Very good. Yeah. Well, thank you, Christina, for those great questions. And thank you, Lecrae. Now is the time to enter your questions for Lecrae, if you haven't done so yet, into the Q&A or chat functions at the bottom of your screen. I know we have some coming along, but first I was going to try to share the screen again and have Lecrae tell us about, he mentioned the English Avenue work, but also regarding the pandemic, something that you were involved in, Lecrae. I'm going to play a little video. And if you can kind of narrate about that day working with Love Beyond Walls to provide, I guess, little outdoor sinks for people to be able to use during the pandemic. Talk a little bit about that project.
Yeah, as you see, we're putting together what will be the first of its kind hand washing stations around Atlanta. We had noticed that my buddy Terrence Lester had made me aware that the homeless population in Atlanta had no place to wash their hands. All the buildings had closed, the restaurants had closed, so they couldn't get clean to protect themselves. And we felt like that was a right that they deserved in order to stay healthy. So we put these hand washing stations around the city of Atlanta. And then it just broadened to other cities in the South, and then it moved all the way to Australia. And so now it's a whole campaign called Love Sinks In, where hand washing stations are placed around the world so people can stay healthy.
That's great. Thank you for that. All right, we've got some audience questions here. I'm going to stop the screen sharing so we can get to those. We have a lot of people just writing in to say thank you, that they're big fans and your music has meant something to them. Here is Dante Carter saying, thank you so much for the strength to share your journey. I was in a similar place, but without the cameras in my face, and found so much encouragement from your openness. And the question is, outside of therapy and church, how do you protect your faith space on a daily basis?
Yeah, I think, I remain open. I'm a firm believer that everything belongs to God. And so how can you use it in a redeemable way? So people are afraid of things because they're like, oh, that's not exclusively Christian. But there's some things that are not exclusively Christian, but are beneficial. Yoga is something that is beneficial. And so protecting your faith space is a part, it's just all, think of it all as integration. And so integration means, are you protecting your mental space? Are you protecting your physical space? Because if you're not doing those, you're hindering your ability to protect your spiritual space. Obviously, you know, if you are sick with having a heart attack or something along those lines, you're not at your best. And so you can't function healthily in a spiritual way either. So for me, it's been making sure I stay holistic. And then the biggest thing I would say is community, is having close friendships that know everything. So you got to have that inner circle where you know these are not people who are going to shame you for your issues or your questions, but they're going to walk with you. They're not going to try to fix you. They're going to face you and help you process everything you're dealing with.
Okay, and we have one from Noah McGaffey. This is kind of an open-ended question. Lecrae, what made you want to rap for the world? In other words, did you know that when you were 14? Was that all those dreams were for the world, or did you always see yourself on that global stage?
Yeah, I think for me, I never really saw a distinction. I just wanted to rap. It was just in me. You know what I mean? It wasn't a category. It wasn't like, who do I rap for? Do I rap for these people or those people? It was, I have something to say. All who would come and listen, thank you. You know what I mean? It's like, especially when you're creative, you just want to create and you want to express. And so I remember living in Dallas and just going to open mic nights and going to like really earthy. Erykah Badu had this like place called Reciprocity, super earthy, but I just wanted somebody to hear what I had to say. I didn't care. Just, I need to get this off my chest. So yeah, I just wrote because I needed to write and express because I needed to express.
There's a question here. Filming your journey. I know that you do a lot of this when you are, you know, you filmed a trailer for the album, and you've been filming your charity work, and you've been filming sort of the process that you went through to write the book. How important is it to capture everything on film? Is it more about you remembering these things or being able to share your journey in real time?
Yeah. That's a good question. I'm always hesitant to capture stuff on film just because I want to be engrossed in the work. And I don't do it so that other people can see it and say, look at what he's doing. Wow. I do it because it needs to be done. But at the same time, trying to be a good steward and trying to create awareness, realizing that I have a lot of people who look at what I do, I think it's been healthy for me to film things, to give a platform to these organizations, and to these individuals, so that people can see these stories as well, stories of redemption, stories of hope. So it's never really for me because I'm going to do it regardless. As a matter of fact, it was funny when I went out to do the Love Beyond Walls, the Sinks. I literally just called my guy and went out there to go do it, and he was like, "Hey, can you come back and let's put some syncs together because it helps if I have a camera crew there, it helps give some awareness to the organization that I have going on." I was like, sure, I don't care. And so, had we not done that though, the world wouldn't have seen it and it wouldn't have taken off and become a global thing. So, but I just love doing it.
So we have a question from Brenda Walker. How did your family help you in the therapy process? You talked about good friends earlier a bit with your family. How did that go? Were your kids aware of what you were going through?
No, my kids were really young. The oldest at the time I think was 10. So they were really young. So it wasn't much they could do. They were, thankfully, they didn't really feel the full effects of it. I mean, they probably felt the negative effects, which was daddy's gone all the time. But it wasn't like they got to see all the dysfunction that was going on. Most of it was like, I'm on the road for months at a time where a lot of it is happening. The problem was when I came home, I was just drained and tired. So they probably didn't get the fullness of who I am and the presence of who I was in those moments, but I don't think they felt like this like bad season. My wife, however, it was really tough on her. So I think therapy for her was like a godsend, you know, therapy for both of us, but especially for me going through therapy, because I literally became a different person. Like she just didn't know. I think she understood my childhood and history. She didn't understand how it was affecting me. And therapy really gave her some understanding of the world that I came from.
We have another question here. How has the Atlanta hip hop community accepted you over the years?
Atlanta is amazing, man. Atlanta is like there's no crabs in a barrel here in Atlanta. Everybody loves everybody. Everybody supports everybody. And so you know, I could call pretty much most of the artists in Atlanta right now and have conversations with them. You know, I become good friends with T.I., with you know, 2 Chainz, Disturbing the Peace. I've gotten to hang out in the studio with Big Boy from Outkast and met Andre from Outkast. Some of the younger artists as well, you know, from Lil Key to Gucci Mane. I guess Gucci's not that young, but some of the younger artists, it's been great. I think they respect what I do. You know, I remember having a conversation with Migos, Offset from Migos, and he was like, bro, when I listen to your music, I don't think gospel. I just think it's good music, but then it's got a message in it that I respect. And I think that's, you know, Atlanta just appreciates Atlanta. It just appreciates everybody who's creating and contributing to the music scene.
Good. We have, this is more of a comment than a question, but from Dr. Joyce Morley. She again wants to thank you for sharing your story. She says she's a licensed psychotherapist in Atlanta, and she says it's very important for men, especially African-American men, to engage in the process of therapy. But are there some barriers there? Do you feel men feel like they're not as strong if they engage in this activity? Yeah, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, of course, men in general, um, I think will struggle just because of that the cultural narrative that we have to be tough and that we're weaker for sitting in a chair. And then of course there's all kinds of like caricatures on television. I mean, you know what I mean? All the caricatures that we used to see about the beer drinking guy and the football and the you know what I mean? I'm not sitting in no shrink's chair type of stuff. I think culturally when you get into the African American man, there's another level there because we tend to glorify or glamorize trauma. You know, it's almost like you pat yourself on the back for it, like, oh, but you didn't go through what I went, but you don't know about. And it's like, oh, actually, that's traumatic. That's nothing to like celebrate. But we don't have an outlet for it. Our comedians talk about very traumatic things, and we laugh because that's been one of the ways we cope with some of the things that we've experienced. So it's not, you know, I mean, there's a financial barrier too, probably in a lot of African-American communities to therapy, but mostly I just think it's something that we just have written off as like, nah, you know, you'll get through it.
Yeah. Okay. We have one more audience question, and then I'm going to have the final question for a personal question for me. Robert Moreno wants to know, I'm from San Diego, and I understand, Lecrae, that you spent some time out here. If so, how did San Diego impact you at all?
Yeah. My grandmother she lives in San Diego still. I spent a good portion of my childhood there, and it had a huge influence on me. Huge influence artistically. My who I am as a person, I think was hugely influenced by it. My introduction to hip hop was in San Diego. You know what I mean? Like because living on the West Coast as a little bitty kid, you know, there was, you know, Los Angeles was 2 hours away. So it was just, we drive to Inglewood and you're like, oh, I didn't know all this stuff existed. And so you just got introduced to stuff pretty fast. And then more than anything, I would say on my faith journey, you know, my grandmother was the only Christian that I knew really in my family at the time. So she was very pivotal in my faith journey as well.
Yeah. When did you arrive in Atlanta? When did you get to?
13 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah, 13 years ago.
So, okay, here's my question. It's a two-parter. The first part is serious and second part is silly. So the first part is, I tuned into an event that you did with Dan Cathy and Louis Giglio a while back, and I understand, I'm not going to recount for our audience what the situation was per se, but I was going to ask you in terms of having to deal with the media or different things. You know, anytime you write a book or write an album, you're exposing your thoughts and your feelings, you become more vulnerable. And anytime you, it's like every time you add another layer of openness, there's more vulnerability. Did you feel like during that time, because wasn't that was near the beginning of the pandemic, the
Mhm.
book was in process, about to be released in a few months. I just wanted to take us back to that day, and from you, just describe your vulnerability from that day. We don't have to rehash what happened, but just
Yeah.
people can look it up on YouTube, but just in terms of how you learned anything from that experience.
Yeah, I think I learned a lot from that experience. I mean, one is when you're on a public platform, um, you know, and you're speaking about issues, especially concerning disenfranchised people groups or minority people groups, you always have to consider them first. You have to consider the person who stands the risk to be most offended, most hurt by what's happening during the conversation. You're going to be misunderstood, but you don't want to be misunderstood by the people who you either came to represent or uh, could be subject to the most damage from your time there. So I definitely learned that. And then I also just learned, you know, vulnerability and transparency, phenomenal. Leaders lead in vulnerability. At the same time, you have to know when and where um, that is, you know, an acceptable place. You don't want to just uh, cast pearls before swine. You know what I mean? You want to really be appreciated. And it's not to say that I wasn't appreciated in that space, but it is to say that why I was there may be very different than why I wanted to be there. And so you just have to understand what is being asked of you. Are you there because you make the team look good, or are you there because they really believe in who you are and what you have to say? And so you just have to be careful in those situations, because sometimes people are not asking for every facet of who you are. They're asking for a piece of who you are. And so
Right.
that was what I learned.
Yeah. And then final question. So you posted on Instagram earlier this week a picture of you in roller skates. So I have to ask a roller skating question. Did you roller skate as a kid, and did the music at the rink influence you? Because
Oh, yeah. Oh yeah, I definitely was a roller skating kid. I loved it. Of course, the music influences. Atlanta still, I still skate, because Atlanta, you can go to, you know, Cascade was the spot. Now, you can go out to the burbs, to some Sparkles or some places like that, and get your skate on. But it's just a cultural thing. I don't know how to explain it. It's something that even the most gangster of gangsters could still be found on some skates when the music is right. And so, yeah, I love it.
all right. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Lecrae, and also to Christina Lee for moderating. I think it was a great discussion, some great questions from the audience as well. Want to thank the audience for being here with us, and please note that this event will be available to view online later. And one more plug for our Atlanta Press Club Louder Milk Young debate series, which is on gpb.org on October 19th. So check that out. If you want to learn more about the Atlanta Press Club, see our upcoming events, support us, make a donation, just please go to our website, atlantapressclub.org. Thank you again for joining us today, everyone. And thanks again to Christina Lee and Lecrae. We'll see you soon.
Thank you so much, and congratulations on the book release.
Thank you for that.
All right, Lecrae and Christina, if y'all will hang on for 1 second.
Okay.
We'll just do a final comment after just a second.